Kia ora, guys. Awesome. Thank you all for coming. I'm not using the microphone. I hope that that's okay and you guys can all hear me all good. Just let me know if you can't or if I mumble or anything like that, and then James can probably flick a microphone on for me, but we'll try and track along without it. Kia ora. So I guess just in the way of introductions, my name is Caleb. I am an elder at Redeemer Church in Tauranga, so I live over in Tauranga with my wife and my daughter. I am a counsellor over in Tauranga, and I run a private practice from my home where I work privately, and I also run contracts for the DHB and PHO, so government sort of paid contracts, wherein if you go to the GP and say, I want help and stuff, I might be one of the people that you get sent to, if you live in Tauranga. So that's a little bit about what I do. I studied at BTI, so Bethlehem Tertiary Institute over in the Bay. And enjoyed my time there. That's me. So I've worked in high schools, run various programs, sort of launched out of AUT and stuff like that around mental health, and been involved in a whole lot of like research and stuff like that around youth and mental health and things like that. So yeah, that's me. So I am talking about Christians and mental health, or Christianity and mental health. And just hopefully, my goal basically today is just to maybe sort of answer a few questions, clear up some any sort of like confusion people might have around mental health, or queries or worries people might have about mental health and accessing mental health services. And I may end up causing more questions than I do provide answers, and that's fine. This will not be a comprehensive guide to mental health and your engagement in it. Come on in, guys. Awesome, come and grab a seat. So what I thought I would crack on with to open us up was just to look at some objections that I have heard in my practice and have had before I started studying counselling, that people have towards sort of accessing mental health services or engaging in counselling or therapy and stuff for themselves. So also, at the end, I'm going to open it up to any questions you have, and they can be around what I'm talking about here specifically. They can be more broad. One thing I would ask you is just to take care of yourselves. So if content comes up that makes you feel uncomfortable, absolutely feel free to go to the bathroom and take off, and don't be here for the rest of it and stuff like that. Not deep diving into anything super hectic. But just for you guys to be mindful to take care of yourselves and your own mental well-being and stuff like that, sitting in here as we talk these things, and be respectful of each other. A couple of things, objections that I hear when it comes to mental health. So some general objections that people, both Christians and non-Christians, I've heard have before. One of the big ones being that I've been to therapy before and it didn't work. Get this a lot, not a lot, but I hear people sort of say that this sort of thing, and my challenge to that, I think, is that often comes out of sort of an assumption about how sort of therapy works, right? So you go and see your doctor is kind of medically all-knowing, and the advice they give you, you follow, right? And they provide a lot of information. Whereas counselling and therapy is a lot about a relationship. So you go and you meet the person and you connect with them. And obviously, there are plenty of people whom you will not connect with. You've experienced this in life. This is true of therapists also. So it's really important for therapy that you kind of connect with a therapist. It's their job to try and facilitate that and make that happen. So it's often the case for people who sort of say, I've been to therapy and it didn't work. I've tried this person. I went to the school counsellor. I did this and it just wasn't for me. Each therapist is unique in and of themselves as a person, but they're also unique in terms of their training and the way in which they practice. So yeah, different counsellors and therapists work different ways. They use different models of counselling and therapy. It requires that relationship, and you'll connect with some better than others. Shop around. Sometimes you'll have heard of people going to their doctor, their GP, and getting some advice, and it just didn't sit with them. It just kind of didn't match either their worldview, or it didn't fit with what they thought was going on in their body or whatever. And so they go and they seek someone else and get a different opinion. And you can absolutely do the same thing with counsellors and therapists. And the good ones, which is most of them, they typically don't take it personally, right? So they're not going to be offended if you go, the way we're working here isn't really for me. Thank you for your time, but I'm going to try and go somewhere else. They'll almost always be even willing to help you find someone else, right? Because they'll know other people who practice slightly differently, or whose personality might sort of suit you and what you're looking for better. So shop around, and even feel free if you have seen someone to talk to them about that. So another objection that I've heard is that mental health is actually just a choice, and people just need to chill out and stop stressing, so that's why people shouldn't engage in mental health. Mental health problems are not being in a bad mood, right? So they're not feeling like just kind of stink. They're a function of our brain. So this afternoon, I think my elective, I'm talking a whole lot about the brain, so this will clarify this up even more. If you decide to come to this one, feel free to go to a different one. Mental health problems are a situation happening within the brain, and it's not an attitude problem, okay? So there is a spectrum of mental health issues, sort of like extreme mental health issues and lower level mental health issues. And mental health issues are function within our brain, right? And so that's what counsellors and therapists help you to support you to sort of work through how those have come about and what you can do practically, cognitively to help yourself through that. So mental health is not simply a choice, but we can choose to support each other through it and choose to go and access help for it. I don't know if my case is serious enough. I get that a lot of people sort of like, oh yeah, you know, been struggling with this for a while. I ask them, how long? Oh, about 6 years. I go, okay. And I might be the first person that they've come and talked to about that. And there's been that sort of question mark about not accessing help sooner because they weren't sure if it's really serious enough. You know, like I've met other people and they're right up here and stuff, and I'm maybe not quite there. So should I go and access help? From the perspective of someone in the field, the sooner the better. The sooner that you can access help and support and deal with things sooner, the better. Your doctor would advise you the same thing on a physical health issue. The sooner the better. So much the same thing with mental health. If you are experiencing what you have heard of might be symptoms of mental health in any way, even if it may not be like a developing serious mental health problem, but maybe sort of a circumstantial challenge, going and talking to a counsellor can be really, really helpful for that. Some more sort of specifically Christian objections might be things that I've heard like, all you need is the Bible, which is, in one hand and in one sense, and how we use language and words in that is true. Like the Bible is ultimately in that sense all we need. So like all we need is God and the gospel. True, in an ultimate sense. But if we take that in a literal sense, all we need is the Bible, you'll get hungry very quickly and you will starve to death. Or probably sooner because you didn't drink any water. So like there's that like obvious sense we go, oh yeah, of course we know we need to eat, we need to drink, we need to do these other things, we need to exercise and stuff and have relationships and things like that. So in that sort of broader sense and the way that things impact us, yes, like God is ultimate, his scripture and word is final say, but also that in common grace and in God's goodness to us, there is much in life and in our world that we get to participate in good food and good company and wonderful activities. Some of you just went and did, archery and swam and did all these other like awesome things, and it's good for us and we enjoy these things. One therapist from the United States, David Murray, who is a lecturer at, where's he lecturer? He's professor of Old Testament and Practical Theology at the Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary. I'm glad I wrote that down. So he said this about sort of the idea of like biblical counseling. So Christians who become counselors, that for some, biblical means Bible only. For them, biblical counseling could be more accurately renamed Bible counseling. In principle, it means that only the Bible, that you use only the Bible in counseling people. Nothing else is helpful and anything else is compromise. That, however, is not how the idea of biblical is historically been understood. In the past, it has meant that something is either contained in the Bible or consistent with the Bible. That's based on the belief that God has revealed truth in two places, in the Word and in the world, where therefore we discover God's truth by reading God's Word and reading God's world through the lens of God's words. I said it again. We discover truth by reading God's Word and reading God's world through the lens of God's word. So God's word in the Bible being the ultimate authority, so that when we engage in things, even when you go to your doctor, your physio, your teacher, your lecturer and stuff like that, the information that's presented to you, we then as Christians, we interpret that through the lens of Scripture, the information that's given to us. Even around, Tony this morning, right? So he was even talking about like that idea of meditation, right? So there are different ideas of meditation. There is a Christian understanding of meditation, and there is sort of Eastern mysticism sort of idea around what meditation looks like. And so like the base concept of meditation, there is a Christian view, a biblical view in which to look at that. So the same is true with the rest of the truth that we discover in the world in science or psychology. What else have I got? Lost my place. I've got another quote here from that I found really helpful in thinking about some of the stuff from an awesome preacher that I really appreciate named Kylam over in Australia. So he was talking specifically about church planting and pastors and that, and sort of the heavy load that they bear in expectation. And he sort of mentions that as a church plant sought to build gospel culture. So as a church planter, seeking to build gospel culture, I turned issues of first importance into issues of sole importance. Gospel centrality became gospel exclusivity. Christ and his salvation were the fix to every problem and the answer to every question. While it's true the gospel is what we ultimately need when we're planning a church or leading one, it's not the only thing we need. Developing leadership, communication systems, and skills all play significant roles in establishing a healthy church and being a healthy person. So that idea that the gospel is absolutely central. So when we think about our bodies, when we think about our minds, when we think about our relationships, our families, how we approach our work, the gospel is obviously central in all of these things, but there is information and support to be found in creation and in God's sort of common grace to us that can be really helpful for us to be able to access and utilize. Another one would be that, so a non-Christian counsellor won't understand my faith and its importance. Correct. Some of the things that I would put to that, so some of the sort of assumptions kind of made in that thinking. One is that a Christian counsellor will understand your faith and its importance. We're rather fortunate in this country that actually just over half of sort of all registered counsellors and therapists actually claim to be Christian, which is really cool. So there are two professional bodies for counsellors in New Zealand. One is the NZAC, so the New Zealand Association of Counsellors, and one of them is NZCCA, so New Zealand Christian Counsellors Association. And the NZCCA is actually the larger of the two and has more members, which is really, really cool. So there is a lot of counsellors, so it's kind of a slightly higher than 50-50 chance if you go see a counsellor that they come from some understanding of God exists and the Bible is important and that sort of thing, which is really, really cool. If a counsellor is not a Christian, no, they will not directly understand your faith and its importance the way that you understand it, but as well as you've experienced, there is a broad umbrella of people that come under the sort of broad umbrella that will call themselves Christian, and some of them will believe that things like the Bible and church are very important, and there are some who call themselves Christian who don't think the Bible matters at all, and they don't think church or anything like that matters at all. They might not even think praying is particularly important or anything like that, right? So there's a broad spectrum, and so the counsellor you're sitting there talking to is probably not going to sit there and give you a comprehensive unpacking of their personal theology. But what's really helpful to know about how counsellors and therapists are trained is that they are not trained to sit there and unpack their own personal beliefs onto you, but rather help you unpack and better understand your own beliefs. So both a Christian and non-Christian counsellor will ask you things about spirituality, faith, your understanding of why you're here, what your purpose is. And those are really helpful questions for Christians and non-Christians. For Christians to be able to think more clearly, dig more deeper into their faith and what that actually means and how that impacts their life. And for non-Christians to sort of unpack and understand better, like, do they have a sense of purpose? Where does purpose come from, like, you know, and that sense that actually is in all of us, and I haven't met a person yet who doesn't have it, that sense of searching for, longing for, looking for meaning. And I genuinely mean that. I haven't met someone yet that doesn't have some sense of that. Yeah, so, you know, when it comes to accessing mental health, if you're struggling with mental health, do it. If you could find a Christian counsellor, that could be really, really helpful to have that. If you can't, it's not necessarily necessary for you to get mental health support from that person. If they're any good, they will not undermine your beliefs, right? Because that's not their jobs, and that's not how mental health support works. It's not to undermine your beliefs about purpose and why you were here, but even actually better to utilize that and understand how that works for you. Thought randomly came to me when I was preparing my notes this week was that your surgeon might not be a Christian, but if your appendix bursts, you'll go to them anyway. So similar with struggling with mental health. Go and access mental health services if you can see, or people, or as well, if people have seen around you who love you clearly, that it might be helpful for you to do so. So should Christians engage in mental health services? Ultimately, obviously, as a counsellor, I'm somewhat biased, but I say my answer is yes, if they need to. People sort of Christians will ask questions of me, like things like, so can't my pastor counsel me? Your pastor can absolutely provide like love and care and scriptural wisdom and guidance and speak into things in a direct and helpful and amazing way that your counselor can't, because your therapist isn't going to speak directly and weightedly into your decision making like your pastor might when they counsel you. You know, you said to your pastor, like, man, really thinking about, moving in with my girlfriend, and I don't really know if we're going to get married and stuff. Your pastor's probably going to go, don't do that. Your counselor's going to ask you how you're processing that, like why you think that, like what your system of values are there and stuff like that, and dig into that. So they work differently. So your pastor isn't going to be your therapist. Your pastor is going to provide you pastoral care. So you seek those people for that pastoral care. And if you are accessing a mental health service, someone you know is, and they're a Christian, encourage them to also be getting pastoral care at that time, to be able to be talking to their pastor or their elder about the things that they're discussing in therapy as they feel comfortable to do so, and some of the things that you're looking at with a therapist or a counsellor. They can't give you therapy if they're not a trained therapist, ultimately. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about when it comes to mental health, because often surrounds it, is things like mental health medication. So what do I do as a Christian if my doctor or my counsellor wants to talk about or recommend mental health medication? My first sort of advice for Christians who are worried about that is to ask questions, right? So your doctor, your counsellor should know a fair amount about the medication that they might want to recommend. You have the freedom of choice there. If you wish to engage in that and you can sort of see rationally how that might be helpful for you, wonderful. If you have no idea how medication or the kind of medications that they might want to recommend are helpful, research it, look it up. Most mental health medication prescribed in places like New Zealand and Australia are fairly safe, not necessarily have no symptoms, but are fairly safe. It is extremely difficult to do anything like overdose on them or anything like that, because the way that they are designed now, the SSRI sort of medication. The way I sort of, if I can use this, black seems to show up best. All right. The way I often sort of describe to help people understand how mental health medication works is if this was a someone's life experience and the spectrum of how they experience their emotion and their cognitive, like thinking and things like that. And most people, typically mentally well and well-developed people, will function somewhere in here like this, right? You have some good days, have some bad days, but somewhere around the middle-ish, right? You'll have probably heard of things like bipolar disorder, which is extreme ends, so very, very high, very, very low, and swinging like that. And for people, their lived experience is something like this. For people who experience extreme anxiety, their experience is something like this. And for people who experience depression, it's something like this. You get the idea. Somewhat outside of what one might perceive to be the sort of norms. What medication can help to do for some is in effect put bars in. You've ever been bowling and you see those little like kiddie lane like bars that they put up so you don't gut a bowl every time like I would? Right, what they help to in effect sort of help establish these max perimeters. Some people have talked about having tried mental health medication before, and they feel like they react really adversely to it because they have a sense of feeling numb. That can often be the case for people who mental health medication, and seeing a therapist hand in hand is really important and really helpful for them to be able to understand that what that sensation isn't that they're particularly necessarily feeling numb. The intention of the medication is not to numb you, but is that what they're used to feeling is this. So then when some degree of normalcy comes in, that feels like nothing. The extremes that their body and brain are used to are so extreme that medication sort of makes it feel like they're not feeling anything at all. What having those in at that time is not a solution. Right? Mental health medication is not proposed as a solution to mental health problems. They provide an opportunity to work on the effects that are going on, so to hand in hand see a therapist, see your GP, and start working on different things. And often most GPs, worth their salt, unless the situation they can see is extreme, will try to get people to do other things before they even suggest medication, right? So to work on, so physically, right, because our body, brain, mind is all interconnected. So, how are you sleeping? How are you eating, right? Are you exercising? All these sorts of things, start attending to that. Do you have community around you? Are you talking to people? Do people know how you're feeling? Right, go and attend to these things before they look at things like medication. So that's just some information about medication, try and take some of the mysticism out of it. They don't do like lobotomies or anything anymore, so none of that's going to happen. So how I work as a therapist, so the sort of two modes or models of therapy that I'm trained in particularly are CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, and narrative therapy. So CBT, looking at how our thinking and behavior interact and how we can alter one to affect the other, and working on both together. So looking at our patterns of thinking and patterns of behavior and looking at how we might alter those intentionally to then sort of boost the cycle, right? We help our thinking, change some of our behavior, change some of our patterns of behavior to change some of our patterns of thinking. Narrative therapy, looking at the stories that we sort of make about ourselves and we understanding where those come from, right? So you'll probably know people like this. I fortunately only know like maybe two of you in here, so none of this is personal to anyone. But people you'll no doubt know will say things like, I'm just a clumsy person. Right, it's a story that they tell them about themselves. Like, I'm such an idiot. These sorts of things, right? Stories that we tell about ourselves. Now, language is a very powerful indicator about the stories that we tell. So that's the idea of narrative therapy, is where do the stories we tell about ourselves, the way we think about other people and relationships, like where do they come from, right? So if people say things like, yeah, man, love hurts, right? There's some understanding that story, that narrative has come from somewhere where they've had some experience, and you can see how that has formed. So helpful and unhelpful narratives in a person's life. So I work largely with those, and in particular using ideas around neuroscience and neuropsychology, so how your brain has developed, which is what I'm talking about this afternoon, over time, being able to understand how your brain works in order to utilize the incredible design and gift that God has given us in our brains to help us to be more healthy, well-developed human beings Christians and friends and family. So that's the bulk of sort of how I work, and hopefully answering some of the questions or concerns people might have around mental health. And I imagined that coming here, I didn't imagine the group would be this big, but I imagined that coming here that people might have a whole bunch of questions that you might like to be able to ask a therapist. So I'm going to open up to a Q&A. What I'm hopefully not looking for is for me to unpack your mental health issues going on here right now. This is not really the context in which I think it would be best to do that. So we won't do that. So not so much like sort of like personal work through questions and stuff, but more broadly maybe about whatever you've come in mind with, like how you might help someone who's experiencing a struggling mental health or whatever for that. So if you guys want to sort of think about kind of any particular questions you might have about anything that I've said or anything you've thought you might would like to ask a therapist or a Christian therapist or how that works before, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions. Yes?
What advice would you give to avoid kind of giving hollow advice and hollow help to people who are struggling with mental health?
Hollow?
Help and like advice to them. Like if they come to you and they're struggling, how do you avoid giving hollow help?
Sure, yeah. So that's a common one. There's a very natural thing in us when someone comes to us, we want to help them, right? So someone we care about, or typically like sort of like, you know, in human nature, someone comes up and they're like, you know, hurt something, like you want to do something, right? The tendency in many of us is to try and fix things, right? And with mental health being a fairly complex and complicated situation, we can be often, without any training or being in the wrong context, we can be about as helpful to that person who's coming to us with their mental health problems, sometimes when we try to fix it, as we can to someone who's been like, my appendix just burst! And it's kind of like, well, I cannot help you with that. I will call 911. So often I would actually suggest a similar thing, not to call 911 if someone's like, man, I'm really struggling with mental health and I feel down a lot. They're like, well, just let me just call the police for you. But to help them access help. Mental health is often very isolating for people. Obviously, people talk about like, the sort of the stigma around it. People feel uncomfortable talking about that because it's largely misunderstood. So being able to help people feel accepted and loved and cared for and encouraging them in that to be able to access help. So if you're in a church, being able to talk to your pastors, your elders, people that you trust who sort of disciple and care for you, helping them come along and bring support in around that they can feel safe and comfortable with that. One thing I would really encourage you to do, particularly so like, if you're here and you've got campus or something like that, or you're like leading a youth group, is not to promise something you can't keep, right? So don't promise confidentiality and don't promise to fix the problem. Some of the problems that some particularly young people will face are complex and can take a long time to work through, and without the proper training you will not fix that problem. So don't promise things that we can't deliver, but you can ensure them of what you can deliver, which is to try and support them as best you can with the skills and capabilities you have. So I think being honest about what we're capable of, reassuring them of our care towards them, and empathizing with them. Hearing and validating their experience is a really, really powerful thing. No doubt you people as young leaders in that will have had plenty of young people come to you because of the relationship you've built with them and share things with you that they may have never shared with anyone before. It's really, really helpful for their going forward if that information can be validated, which is no more than I hear you and I hear what you're saying, and I hear how that feels for you, and my heart goes out for you, right? Which doesn't fix anything, but it validates their experience, and that validation will be really helpful for them going forward to being able to, with the right people, professionals and their pastors and maybe parents and that who care about them, being able to continue to help them get well in there. Does that answer your question, man?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I have a question about how it connects to sin.
Mm-hmm.
So where the origins sometimes of mental health can be because of sin that we've been addressed. Yeah, what do you say to that?
Yeah. So on some level, there's always sin. So people have things done to them. People do things, and on some level that is sin. So some people really struggle with mental health because of their upbringing, right? So they were raised in a really dangerous or violent home, stuff like that. That's clearly a situation of sin, and that's impacted them. So at some point you can always find where ultimately we we live in the world that is affected by the fall, and sin has impacted this world, and the way in which we function in it. So yes, sin plays a part at some point, and that's why I said at the beginning, that the gospel and the word in that is primary in that. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question there or not, but
yeah, I think just thinking about the origins of sin.
Mm-hmm.
The origins of mental health issues, if they are in sin,
Mm-hmm.
then with medication not just blocking things up, even though it is real mental health issues that they have. So you're what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
this kind of fluctuation. If their bipolarism is it is genuinely bipolarism, but it was caused by
sin.
I don't know.
Anything particularly of something that they may have done, or a situation that they put themselves into, or okay, yeah. So our sin has our choices and actions, and as well as our sin, have real consequences and effects on us, right? So our brain has a particular wonderful, complex but wonderful design that God has given to us, and the environment we grow up in, the choices that we make have an impact on that brain. So I would if I'm understanding what you're asking, I would sort of say some of the decisions that we make in sin issues can then affect how our brain functions, and then negatively affect us. So people who choose to, just in that same way that people that choose to drink and drive and that sort of thing, if they crash, can physically be maimed and affected sometimes for the rest of their life by the sort of the sin decision that they made. True can be of their mental health. So that person horrifically affected by the decision they made to drink and drive, were I a physical therapist, would still try to help them to get well in their body and stuff like that, and understand how their decisions led to what happened to them. And the same is true of therapy, being able to help people to understand how the decisions that they made and how the things that they've gone through have affected how their mental health works and things like that. Yeah. So I would say that in medication will typically, with the other added supports in that, actually bring clarity. People often struggle to actually have any understanding why they have mental health issues. Or struggle for their brain sort of struggle to even think about some of the either things they did or things that happened to them, because it just seems too horrific. So medication and the extra support can be helpful for them to see more clearly, to actually look at and address those sorts of things, be they sort of sin issues or things that had happened to them or whatever. Yeah. Yes.
Just kind of going off that a little bit as well. If you did kind of stated that seeing a therapist or counsellor is important and is not necessary to have a exclusively Christian counsellor. How would a counsellor who's not coming from a Christian worldview handle the issue of sin if it was perhaps a sin that their worldview would say that that's not a sin?
Sure.
Then they'd probably maybe try and make the person feel more comfortable with the sin that they did.
The choices they're making? Sure. Yeah, so a person's therapist or a person's worldview is going to inevitably come into play to a point, but a big part of their training is to, as much as humanly possible, and I say as humanly possible because it's humanly impossible to not have it happen at all, to withhold their own personal worldviews, to not let that weigh in as much. What they will use is different terminology. So I'm a Christian who is a counsellor, and so when people come and talk to me, I understand. So Christians and non-Christians, I have an understanding in my worldview on sin, right? So the things that this happened to me, that's sin. I went out and I did this and stuff. I understand that is sin. But to withhold that and to see how their actions and behaviour and choices have an impact, and to particularly like explore. So then you sort of raises questions of like morality and meaning and stuff like that. Help people to unpack like how they formed those ideas. Like like they cheated on their spouse, something like that. Being able to understand like, why did you do that? Like why, either in that moment or in your thinking now, like why is that okay? Is that not okay? Do you feel guilt about that? What do you think that is? Like what do you do with that? Being able to understand. So the terminology is different. A non-Christian counsellor won't understand sin as a Christian understands it, but they will understand that our actions, choices, experiences have consequences on how our brain functions and how our mental health works. And that's where it's really important, I think, for Christians to be receiving Christian sort of biblical, theological support through their life anyway, but particularly through mental health struggles, things that they've been through and things that they have done. So that's that's why we're encouraged to confess our sins to one another within the body, so that we have that. So your therapist is not there to call you out on your sin, and they won't do that. It's not a part of their work, no more than your podiatrist will do that. It's a foot doctor. Yeah, man.
Yeah, my question was like kind of similar to what you were talking about, but it's just like how you say that your job as a therapist is not to present or impose your own beliefs and views.
Sure.
And so if you're as a Christian coming and working with a non-Christian, like how does your faith and the gospel kind of influence that? And like as you develop a relationship with this person, it's like, man, like I'm gospel with you.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
How does that work out?
Yeah. So it's really, really hard, and Christian counsellors and therapists have a really strong heart struggle with that, because legally in this country I cannot do that. So if someone comes to see me, they can't say, "Hi, my name is Caleb Johnston. Have you heard about our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ?" I can't legally do that, right? So that's against the law. Anyone could report me for that, and I would not be allowed to practice ever again. So it's very serious consequences for enforcing that. But there are workarounds within the law wherein I am allowed to share my faith. So within counselling, pretty well all counsellors will talk at some point, because you'll go through and talk about a person's entire life. You might think you're coming to talk about being just like really badly bullied at school, but you'll end up talking about how things are going at home, your other relationships, your thoughts about meaning and purpose, spirituality and faith and stuff like that. And in that space, I fairly regularly will have people ask me, what do I think about faith and spirituality? Once someone asks me, what do you think about faith and spirituality? I have every legal right to share that. So it's about kind of creating opportunity and conversation and relationship and stuff like that and building curiosity and stuff. Or even if they ask me, why are you a counsellor? Like I am a counsellor and went into the work I went into because of my faith. And so that is then my opportunity to share that. So it is tricky and it is hard, but there are workarounds, and Christian therapists who wish to do so can typically find a way within the law to do so. Can't be as direct as we might like, but are allowed to sort of share our points of view around that sort of stuff if we're clever.
How do you look after and protect yourself? So you have people in your life who are who need a lot of support for mental health.
So how do you guys, or how do I? Anyone, sure. So I'm fortunate that is a huge part of my training. So self-care, how to look after myself. So I spend sort of 6 to 7 hours a day sitting with people as they tell me the very heavy darkness of their minds and their life and the things going on, and that weighs that's a toll. That's a heavy thing. If you've sort of sat with anyone for a couple hours and they've sort of told you some of the dark stuff they've gone through, afterwards you're like, oh my goodness, right? And it's heavy, and you feel that. And I'm a human being, and I feel that too. So being trained to take care of ourselves is really important. One of the things that I would really sort of encourage, particularly like young leaders and stuff like that around that, is that to be mindful of that like deep drive to help people, right? We want to help and care for and love people, but we need to hold that in balance and perspective, right? Someone's, again, the example, I don't know why I keep using this example, someone's appendix has burst, right? All your love and care for the world actually needs you to do a particular thing, which is to get them to someone who can actually help them. When it comes to supporting people in mental health, we need to be mindful of our own limitations and what we can deal with. So being mindful of, man, if I'm going to go and talk to this young person, and I know that they're stressing out at the moment, and I know they're going to want to unload that to me, how am I going to take care of me later? Like, how am I going to go sit, like try and slow my own mind, process the heavy things that they're telling me, understand what that means in scripture, like, understand, like how that has impacted me, right? People can share stuff with us, and whether we like it or not, our mind starts running because of our own experiences and things that are going on for us. So like being able to be mindful of our own limitations, how things might affect us, and how we're going to care for ourselves, right? If you are extremely tired and it's been a really long day, and someone hits you up and been like, man, I feel like everything's falling apart, can I come talk to you? It may be best for both you and them to either support them to find someone else to talk to at that time, or say, hey, can we catch up tomorrow or in the morning? I'm just really shattered. I don't think I'd be particularly helpful for you. That is really hard. So we're talking about learning to say no. And it seems very harsh and hateful to say no to someone who seems desperate and is struggling. But I would encourage you that have made it to that point. We are quite resilient creatures, thanks be to the Lord, and they will most likely make it through to the morning to be able to talk to you then. So it is hard. Tell them you love them, but you can't maybe provide what they might be looking for at that time. So finding a balance between how much you want to help and support them, understand your own capacity, and try and find a balance in that. And that's a learning curve, because obviously as we grow, so does our capacity to support people as we learn and add things to that. Yeah.
What would you say to a young person who has been in and out of the sort of mental health services and feels like they're just a number, and that no one really cares, and that it's not very helpful, and they just wouldn't really want to give it another go?
Yeah. So that's exactly. So that is really, really hard. And again, the system can very much feel like that. It's trying to deal with masses of people. So the statistics we know about is kind of like experiencing mental health, and then that we know of that then access help. It's like 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 men, and those are the ones that sort of put their hand up and access help. So the portion then of that sort of like maybe stepping their toe in but they're not quite doing it and things like that is much higher. So it's a very underprepared, very short-staffed, sometimes not particularly well-trained system of mental health as far as the government sort of goes, and public health systems, trying to manage the bulk of the population's sort of mental health struggles. So it is unfortunately in this country not uncommon for that to happen. Public health can be really hard, where people can access private services. Those are often better. So I work for myself, so I get to manage my books. If I don't want to see more people because I'm not feeling up to it, then I don't see more people. If I feel like I have capacity to see more, then I can see more, which means that each person that I'm seeing gets my full attention and care. Often people in the public health sector, mental health nurses and those sorts of things, don't always have that freedom. They're expected to do more, and because more is needed, they're expected to do more than more and then more. And so there's a very high rate of sort of like burnout even amongst sort of mental health workers. So my encouragement would be to them to keep going, because they have a right in this country to access services that are helpful to them and beneficial to them. Right? Those mental health services should understand quite well that not each one person is going to connect with someone clearly. So I've had people come to me before, and they're like, "Oh, you're like kind of youngish. I thought counsellors were sort of in their 50s plus." And they particularly weren't comfortable talking to me because of my age. It's totally fine. Because if they're not comfortable talking to me, then as much as I might be like, well, no, I'm a very well qualified and I read a lot and I'm well trained and things like that, I can't take a person, because if they're not going to connect with me, I'm not going to be helpful to them anyway. So better that they find someone that they connect with. So my encouragement is for them to continue to try different avenues into mental health. If the public sector hasn't worked, then possibly the private, if that's an option or if that's available. Yeah, but there are also, like in most places, not in all, but in most places, there are also sort of like charitable services who provide counselling, and they're managed like private counselling. So the therapists and mental health workers working there like caring for themselves well and so able to work well. But then are able to access it basically sort of like a core donation or for free, depending. So that I know of a couple of places in Totara like that, and I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult, I would imagine, to look up places like that in Hamilton and different towns and things. So, yeah. Anything else? Yo.
What does the medication side of things look like when somebody comes off it? Like, what is it? What is the long-term goals once somebody is off it? Do they go back to the extremes, or is it supposed to like help their thoughts and stuff stay in that mellow kind of section?
Yeah, so it's to return to a degree of normalcy in terms of like brain function, and you probably have heard people talk about like the chemicals in your brain. So it's to help them basically. You put those, if you think of that like the bowling pin, right? Is you put those up so that you're not gutter bowling the whole time until you've learnt to bowl yourself, and then those can come off. You get rid of the little like ramp thing, which you just sort of like roll the ball down and start there. You learn to like proper technique and things like that. So that's about like giving you the headspace and clarity to be able to engage better in therapy. Some people find it very difficult to engage in mental health services because of their mental health, right? So it's this very complicated sort of like to and fro there. So medication can be helpful to help people to access the services to help them to get well. So then they don't need them. Think of them being, in that sort of like physical parallel, being somewhat more like crutches. They take off some of the weight so that you can heal, be intentional, go see your physio and do all your exercises and things like that, and like, how does this feel? And how does, doing all that sort of stuff like that, so that your body, your brain can get well. And then you, so typically with most mental health medication, you taper off. So you might be on 25 milligrams or something like that, and you drop down to 20 for a couple of weeks, and then you drop down to 15 for a couple of weeks. And so it's a process of over time dropping down off those things, and you work with your GP and with your therapist to mitigate sort of like any sort of like side effects you might have from that. Might upset things like sleep a little bit and stuff, so then you try and balance that. Yeah. Anything else?
Do you think there's still a bit of a stigma around mental health in the church in New Zealand?
Yeah, hugely. Yeah, hugely. So I think very much, New Zealand has a sort of stigma problem, right? We're very much like, she'll be right. That carries over into the church as well. Not to like, swing a bat at the older generation or anything like that, but there was, I think, more so a thinking around, you don't air your dirty laundry, that sort of thing, right? We don't talk about the stuff going home. My mother-in-law remembers when she was a kid that she didn't even understand that her mum, when she was having her other siblings, was even pregnant, because you didn't talk about sex. You didn't talk about, because if you talk about pregnancy and babies, then you're talking about sex, and we don't talk about sex or anything like that, right? So nothing was talked about. Mum would just go away for a couple of days and come back, and here is a new baby. How did that happen? Don't worry about it, right? So like nothing was talked about, and that can carry a little bit over into the sort of, she'll be right, we won't talk about it. It's no end of frustration to like pastors and church leaders as well when people come along and they're like, Pastor Ola, we need your help, and like, what's going on? It's like, oh, this has been going on. How long has it been going on for? Well, it's been going on for like 4 years. And they were like, well, you've been coming here for 10 years. Like, why haven't you come? We have a relationship, and people often will just like not talk about things, either feel like they can't or shouldn't. A lot of that can be sort of like just attitudes people were raised with. Like, don't be a bother to people. Don't burden them. Like, people aren't worried about your problems. Usually, like, they've got enough going on for themselves. Don't bother them. So like those sorts of ideas can eat away at some of the real sort of like base community, and being able to communicate with each other well and openly. So yeah, I think there's definitely a stigma around it, I think, within New Zealand culture, and that obviously permeates in the church. But I think the church has a really amazing opportunity to actually be a real leader in that socially, about being able to talk more openly about mental health and mental health struggles and stuff like that. And I've seen different churches and church organizations, church planting organizations do really, really well in that, being able to talk about, so because a big one is pastors, elders, church planters, church leaders, youth leaders, and that have like a fairly high rate of burnout, like this huge expectation, right? Here's this, 20, 30, 40, 50 sometimes, young people, and you've got to take care of them all and stuff like that. And that's a huge expectation. It's a very complicated time of life. If you come and hear a bit about the brain and stuff like that, you'll understand a bit better why that's so complicated, that time of life. And so it's a huge expectation. So there's mental health struggles in that are very strong in the church, and there can be a lot of stigma, right? And ideas around like, oh, if you struggle with that, it's because you don't have enough faith, right? You're lacking in faith if you struggle in your mental health, and you should have just prayed about it more and these sorts of things. So yeah, I think there's very much a stigma, but I think the church has an incredible opportunity to actually kind of like counter that and see like how an incredible gift of grace we are and can be to each other, like how we can access and make good use of the like kind of common grace around us that God is given to us. Are you unfit and want to know how to be fit? Go and talk to a personal trainer, right? Go and like Google some of the stuff, right? If you're struggling in your mental health, go and talk to a mental health professional. So I think the church has an amazing opportunity in that, but I think definitely within New Zealand culture that can tend to very much be a stigma. Yeah. Yo.
What sort of tools would you recommend for us to use to overcome that sort of stigma?
I think developing open and honest relationships are really important. So the church, right, when we sort of look scripturally, should be really good at that. We should be getting really good at confessing our sins to one another, mourning and grieving with each other. Grief naturally makes us very uncomfortable. We think about mortality and sort of naturally makes us feel a bit uncomfortable and stuff like that. So we at Redeemer recently had a string of people in our church who have had family members pass away. Mum, husband that pass away. And those people are grieving heavily. I am not I haven't lost someone just now, and so I'm not grieving heavily, but that Christian responsibility to go and be with them and grieve with them and care with them, I think we can kind of create, just in following those biblical principles of how we ought to be with one another, can help us to actually foster a space where people feel people can feel more comfortable to be able to talk openly, right? So when it comes to even issues of sin, because they'll play a role and stuff like that, people being able to confess our sins to one another and stuff like that. So we can go hey man, I'm glad you told me about this. I would love to help you find some help so that you stop doing this. Let's get you some help. Good that you confessed it. Maybe we could go talk to the church leaders and stuff like that, get their support and their view on this as well. So I think kind of thinking about how Christians are told to be to each other. So you can use Logos, like James suggested, and look up things about how Christians ought to be toward one another. Is I think a helpful place to start in thinking about that.
We should all go read Acts.
Yeah. Read Acts. Yep, Sermon on the Mount, look at how we are to care for, to love, to challenge one another, and how we do that in love. Yeah. Is there anything else before we wrap up? I think that's awesome. This afternoon, if you're interested, so I'm talking a bit about the brain in particular. I'll do a quick run through of typically in sort of laboratory conditions how the brain develops, so that you have a sort of base understanding of sort of quick brain 101, how it develops, and then what that looks like in terms of mental health. So where in the brain does mental health function, right? So our brain is a powerful thing, and it's processing basically our entire lived experience all the time and helping us to understand that. So looking at how mental health and that sort of functions in terms of how our brain works. Cool? Awesome. Well done, class. I release you all. Yeah. Is it all good if I just take a second to pray for you guys? Is that awesome? All right, let me pray. God, I thank you for these such wonderful, complicated, beautiful and messy people, Lord, who by your goodness and your grace you've brought here to REgen this weekend to see and know you better, Lord, Lord, so they can serve each other and your body, Lord, all the better. Father, I pray that you would keep them, Lord, that you'd continue to grow them, Lord, that they would seek your faith in your word. Lord, as they look to grow in knowledge, when they look at the world, that they would see that through the lens of your word. God, we pray that throughout this weekend that you would be glorified and we would be edified. In your name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Thanks, guys.